Chapter 2 is about the tricky, difficult task of giving negative feedback at work. Another way to think about it is delivering bad news. Sometimes we do that with our peers, other times it falls on our shoulders to let management know that something's going wrong, something unethical is happening, or to even admit that we've made a mistake. We start the chapter with a case that features Vicky. She's working under really stressful conditions at the front desk of an airline counter, and she's working with a new employee. The new employee is just learning the job, makes mistakes. Vicky gets frustrated and delivers feedback in a very critical way, a way that comes across not negative just to the new employee, but to the customers who are there. Well, Vicky fortunately realizes that this is not a great example of giving constructive feedback as opposed to destructive feedback. She makes amends to her coworker and takes another important step. Rather than this bad news reaching her supervisor through disgruntled customers calling in, Vicky takes it upon herself to let her supervisor know that things didn't go well that evening and that some complaints might be coming in. That was a great step in this case because the supervisor could get ahead of the problem, call the customers, and make amends. Giving criticism or delivering bad news is risky because it puts our identity at risk. It can be threatening to us when we give bad news to others because it looks like we're maybe taking charge when we shouldn't, or maybe we feel like we look like a know-it-all, right? And it's threatening to others because most people think that they're working hard, that they're doing a good job, that they're trying. And the message that we have to give them may contradict that sense of self. Nonetheless, giving feedback is really important in organizations. Good feedback is how we correct problems in workplace behavior. It's how we help people perform better and be more productive. In a rapidly changing economy, organizations need to be able to make adjustments and make those adjustments quickly. How do they make them? By getting feedback from the employees who are actually close to the actual work itself, the people who are working with customers and suppliers and the public. They get feedback from the customers themselves. So, feedback is a way to adapt and to grow and to become better. It's just that the problem is that sometimes it's hurtful. It makes us feel embarrassed. Sometimes the feedback blows up, not because the message is inaccurate, but because it's delivered in a way that feels threatening and increases risk. We've all had this experience of being called out, maybe by a friend who was unhappy with how we were being a friend, or by a supervisor at work. You may have had that happen in person, or it may have happened to you in an online encounter. Those are painful encounters, right? And they're risky because they put our identity and our relationships with others at risk. As we talk about in the chapter, sometimes we can call others in. Calling in is an invitation to discuss what happened, to learn how to do things better. This chapter is all about how to give feedback in a constructive way. Table 2.1 gives a long and pretty practical list of techniques for delivering feedback, and it generally distinguishes feedback that's destructive from that is more constructive. And it helps you decide under what conditions you should give feedback. We know, for instance, that informal feedback can be less threatening than the formal kinds of feedback that you get in like an annual review of your job performance. And so a practical guideline for all of us is to have frequent conversations about performance, low risk, low stakes conversations that are held frequently help us make adjustments more quickly, and they allow us to avoid those more threatening conversations where we have to deliver really bad news. Well, the chapter reviews quite a bit of research on this topic of delivering bad news. It turns out this is one of the topics that's most been studied by communication and management researchers. If you look at the study of feedback at UPS, you'll learn a lot about why feedback is threatening and in the different ways that it can be threatening. For instance, by restricting the options of the person who's receiving the message to simply answering like yes or no. That's called autonomy restriction. And it helps us see that skilled supervisors pay attention to the identity of the person they're talking to. And they know that the message may be threatening. And so they find ways to invite the other person to participate in the conversation, to know, for instance, that that person has ideas about their performance and may even recognize that they need help. They also are careful to affirm the positive aspects of someone's identity, um, a tactic called approbation in the research that we read in this chapter. Another way to think about feedback is that you're serving as a coach. And we review some really interesting research about the nature of safe coaching relationships. And one of the things we can do in our relationships with peers and with the people who work with us is to make it safe for them to learn, right? Safe to make mistakes. Mistakes don't need to be risky at work, especially if we can help people make mistakes on small things and not big things. Making it safe to challenge is another aspect of safe coaching. When we're secure in our own identity as a worker, it shouldn't bother us when people bring up suggestions for doing things differently, questioning the status quo. We should actually invite that because we want to learn and grow together with those we work with. So think about ways to create a safe coaching relationship. Another important idea in this chapter is the idea of growth mindset. You may have been told at some point in your life that you just don't have the ability to do something. Maybe it's fixing mechanical devices or solving a math problem or writing in a particular way. That approach suggests that there's something inherently wrong with people that prevents them from learning. Well, it could be that you have a deficit in that area, but it's more likely that messages that help you learn step by step, that acknowledge that pretty much everybody can learn, even if it's at a different pace. The idea that we can all grow with the proper kind of help and instruction, that's a growth mindset. So rather than dismissing an employee who's not performing well, maybe we need to look at how we can help them grow and learn into their job. That's the growth mindset. And a related idea is to focus our feedback on strengths as well as deficits. We can use our communication to reinforce what people are doing well, to encourage them to build on those strengths. So someone who's outgoing and good at developing relationships, we can really encourage them to use those qualities in their relationships with suppliers or customers, even as we may have to encourage them to talk a little bit less with each customer, to spend a little bit more time documenting the interactions. So you start with a strength and ask people to build on that strength and grow from there. As we think about this really important kind of communication, we can apply the risk negotiation model. An overarching idea, one that can be helpful in all stages or phases of the model, is to think about communication as a dialogue rather than an effort to persuade or change the other person. A dialogue is an invitational kind of communication. We're inviting the other person to join a team that involves us and them working together to figure out what went wrong and what we can do better next time, and how we can stay in touch to keep learning and growing our way to higher levels of performance and job satisfaction. In a dialogue, we look for areas of common ground, but we also make it safe to disagree, to really show those areas where we disagree or have different ideas. It makes it okay to be on a different page, but it also creates a way of understanding those pages from your perspective and the other perspective. So as you think about the four phases, attending or noticing, one thing to pay attention to is maybe the history you have with the other person. Have there been times when you criticize them and they might feel defensive? If so, you may need to start with an approach that really focuses on relationship building and supporting the positive dimensions of their work before you move to anything that sounds like criticism. Sense making is a way to talk to others about your perceptions of what's going wrong. It may be that you're viewing a situation with some impatience or from a point of view that could be adjusted if you talk to more people about it. Get input from other supervisors about whether the performance you're seeing seems to be off base. Run your ideas by other people to make sense of the situation before you decide on your approach. Transforming means choosing approaches to feedback that support the identity of the other person, even as they clearly communicate your expectations and your needs at work. In the table that describes communication options, in that earlier table about approaches to feedback, there are lots of very specific ideas for you to consider in terms of how to approach feedback. And finally, the maintenance phase of the model encourages us to think about feedback as an ongoing process, that we build in communication expectations that tell ourselves and others to talk early and often about problems that are arising before they become serious, that we develop a safe coaching environment, that we all approach our work with a growth mindset.